Hello, everybody.
Yes.
This is Keijsers Koning and our YouTube channel, and we're going to be talking with Popel Coumou about her exhibit Paper Reality, which opened on April 1st and through May 6th. The artist is actually coming to Dallas during the Dallas Art Fair and will be part of the events on April 19th, the gallery night. And you'll be able to meet Popel and actually ask her some questions in person. Anyway, Popel is a Dutch photographer and artist whose work has been collected and shown throughout the Netherlands and actually the States. We've worked together for quite a few years, mostly in New York initially. And this is her first show in Dallas and her first show in Texas. And we're very excited about this. The show has come together very naturally and nicely. And we're going to talk a little bit about her working method, because I know there's a lot of questions of how these are made and how these are achieved. And what I always like about the work is even though you know more about it, you actually appreciate it more. There's no magic button and then it all disappears. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Popel. Hi, Popel.
Hi. Hey. Hello. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I'm Popel Coumou. I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I graduated from the Gerrit Rietveld Academy in 2004, and since then I'm working as a visual artist and mainly with the medium photography. So I'm happy to tell you whatever you want to know.
Yeah, I think what we should get out of the way initially is just the how are these things made, right? And to start with that, we have this great video of one of your pieces. It is untitled PC 155 from 2022. And what I like about this work is that you can really see the layers and how you go about approaching these. And what actually surprised me once I saw this in person, which you didn't really necessarily see on the JPEGs, is that the sun really comes through and burns the edges of the paper. But I'll leave it a little bit to you to kind of describe what we're actually looking at and how these things are built.
Okay, well, actually, since 2004, since I ended the Rietveld Academy, I've always been busy creating my own reality. And I did this by making collages of paper and then back or front lighting them. And in this case, I also made a collage. It was inspired on a space in the Photo Museum in The Hague. I made a paper collage and then backlit it. And it's really interesting. I'm really fascinated in how you can make with very simple materials, like only paper and then some light, you can create a three-dimensional space. So actually the base is a A4 two-dimensional collage, but by lighting it, it comes to life and it becomes a three-dimensional space. So in this way, I can play with photography like painters can do with their paint. They see something and make a translation to their canvas. And in this way, by making collages, I can do this with photography.
Yeah, just to be clear, A4 is about 9 by 12 inches. So, it's like a letter size. So we're actually looking at images that are about, this big, exactly.
Yeah, they're like this, or sometimes even smaller, half of the
Smaller.
size.
Yes, because I remember when I came to your studio. I mean, the window behind you is usually your kind of light box where you have
Yeah,
things glued
yeah.
on. It's very and you really use that natural light. I mean, the fascinating thing is always, and we've talked about that quite a bit, is that photography is all composed out of lights and shadows. I mean, that's all it is. There's no
Yeah.
third dimension, even though it gives that impression. So you're kind of fooling us again with like the idea of this is flat, but through lights and shadows, we see it kind of coming about. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's interesting to note, especially with those windows, that you use, the famous Dutch sunlight that kind of come through and work on your still lives. So what I thought was interesting, you mentioned that it was inspired initially by a museum, but there's also this kind of sense of familiarity that you had in your earlier work, which was with hotels, that there was this kind of strange, hotels you feel at home. They try to make you feel at home and we all recognize it, yet it's foreign in and of itself. And that ambiguity, I guess, that's shared ambiguity. That's always something that you kind of play on, which I find so interesting. You know, we all recognize the objects that we're looking at in this show, and yet it's, if you give them a minute, it's just so fresh, like the, you know, the chair and the table, the window, the open window. And can I ask you something about these papers that you're using? What are we supposed to imagine that we're seeing?
Well, I started off using regular paper, just colored paper and white paper.
Mm-hmm.
But since a few years, I started using, and then I would backlight them and take pictures. But since a few years, I started using photograph of skies, because then I don't have to light the collage anymore when I take a picture, because the light is already hidden in the photographs of the skies. So the red image you see now, it's a red part of the sky, and you have this gradients in it, so it feels like it has a three-dimensional, or it has depth, but it doesn't, because it's just a flat collage. But because there is like the blue is going from light to dark, so it feels it's getting darker.
Yeah, I
So
noticed that
the
especially in the, sorry, yeah, I noticed that especially in the image right behind me, actually, these kind of window openings, that the purple, it actually starts out much darker and then kind of goes to a lighter figuration. So that's all from just the photo paper. So an image of an image, so to speak.
Yeah, so I'm like, every day when this color is the sky has a beautiful color, I'm taking pictures and I'm printing these out, and then I use them for my collages. So every other piece in the collage is just a different part of the sky. And daylight, night light, just red sunsets and sunrises.
Yeah, which reminds me of our previous show, where you were like chasing the landscape, but just really pushing it to this utter, abstraction, where it just became like the Russian constructivists, kind of this pushing it to where abstraction and narrative kind of meet, and it stops.
Yeah.
And
I
then
was
you,
really interested in what the brain needs to understand. But you see, we always want to understand when we see something. We really want to put it in a box and see, like, I can understand what I see. So it's interesting what you have to show to make something recognizable. And because of I made images of horizons, and then I started discovering how beautiful the skies are. Of course, I already knew, but I had all these prints of my work, and then I discovered, like, these skies are so amazing just to use. So I started working with all the leftover papers, and since then it all started. Yeah,
no,
exactly.
and
And then you can see.
it's funny that you kind of went back. So after these landscapes, it kind of was, you reached the ultimate. You can't push it anymore, otherwise it's just a blank piece of paper, which is something of value in and of itself. But
Yeah.
then you kind of went back to the idea of the interiors, and kind of this familiarity or shared familiarity. But they feel very different. They're
Yeah.
you started treating them as abstractions. You started playing with these light sources, which you did previously, but they just have a very different feel. There's an awareness of what the composition is and how far it can be pushed. And
Yeah, I think it's like a development. It's something just grows. So I went from very small bedrooms, like hotel rooms, you said, and I went to bigger spaces, and then I went outside to the most biggest space I could make. And from there, I was looking for the essence, really the minimal that I could use to create a horizon. And from when I finished this, I couldn't make it more empty. It was like empty as it could be. And then I decided to see if I could bring back my interiors again and do the same with my interiors and make them more abstract, so they can balance on the border of abstraction and reality. I like it when it's on first sight an abstraction, and then you look another time again, and then you recognize a chair or a table or a window or whatever you want to see.
yeah, I always admire that you are able to go back into the dialogue that you've had and kind of reinvestigate something. I mean, that's very rare to see, I find, within the arts. Usually you've had that conversation, you're like, okay, I'm done, let's move on, let's go to the next. And you've actually gone back and kind of really um investigated, pushed the idea of where things are and where things are also for in relationship for you, kind of like, oh, look, I've learned these things. What happens if I bring that back? Like, how have I changed as a person? Which is very
Yeah,
admirable that
exactly.
that you're that open about it, and that intrigued about taking us along to that journey.
I thought it's amazing to just give yourself the space to learn and to grow, and like every step you make gives you new energy and you learn a lot, and then you go on to the next step, so you can use it in the next step again. And it doesn't feel like a repetition for me. It's all new, and I'm discovering new things I didn't do before.
What did you discover that most about it? Coming back to a series that was so important, like the interiors or the rooms. What was the more surprising one that, I mean, even though it's not visiting or stepping back, but just using that dialogue, what was what was one of the key components that you were just like, oh, I never saw that, or I never experienced that?
Well, it was more. I think I've always already wanted to go into abstraction, but for the first time now, I found this balance. Not with all the works, but some of them, and I will go on for a long time because I'm still interested in it. But I found this balance between abstraction and realism. So it's like it's a hard balance to find, and I was really happy with the two works you see now that I found it here. So I think that was the biggest step for me, and I'm looking for ways to go on and find new works or new compositions.
So the other series that you're showing in this exhibit are your still lives. So these are made out of clay. They're about, what is it, 5-10 centimeters, which is about an inch and a half in size. I mean, I'll never forget the time when I was getting some water or something, and it was in your fridge, and it's just like filled with all these like little still lives of plants that are there, which is just great. And what's so amazing about these flowers is the more time you give them, you see them, you're like, okay, I see a flower, I see lights coming in, this beautiful, etc. But actually, the more time you give them, the more they reward you, especially the PC 119, which is this very dark background and these glowing red um, flowers that kind of come at you. Is the longer you stand in front of it, it's been really kind of, it's such a reward to the time you give, you are given back so much. It's an interesting way to control um light, to control a composition in a different way than
Yeah,
the paper. I mean, the paper is, because it's flat, it's all about direct composition. The
yeah,
flowers are more about a set design. I always have to think of sets when I see them.
yeah. Well, I when I started in 2003 creating my still lives, I really started because I like photography, but I just missed creating. I missed making things with my hands. So that was the first reason to start making the still lives, and then create this small three-dimensional world and make it two-dimensional. And then I've always wanted to work on them again, but I just didn't know how. And then in 2019, I thought, okay, this is the time to see if I can take back the still lifes from 2003 and 4 and see if I can bring them more into abstraction and make them more monumental. So I wanted to make them more, I would say, in Dutch you would say, well, it's more like autonomous. I want to see how I could bring the abstract shapes and the composition of the interiors into the images with the still life. So you have this contrast between the shapes of the flowers and then the straight lines with the architecture. So that's what I thought I wanted to do, and that's what I did, and I'm really happy with the result because it has this. You can see it's these fragile flowers, and you can see it's made because you can see the fingerprints, and then you have these harsh straight lines. And it's really interesting how these two worlds come together.
I mean, I always have to think of films. I mean, I'm thinking of like, it's funny. I always have to think of Fritz Lang with his, Metropolis and the jaggedy backgrounds, and even prior to that, they would make these cardboard sets that would wobble, but your imagination just went there, But these angular forms, you've never done a film, have you? Or have you ever? Are you inspired by films at all, or set designs in that sense?
No, actually, I'm a person that stays in my studio all the time. I'm just, I'm in my own world, and by playing with stuff and I'm making mistakes and doing stupid things. Well, I think it's stupid, but luckily nobody sees it. That's
Yeah.
why I feel so free to do everything. And it just by playing around and give myself the space to do everything I like, I discover new steps, and that's how also these things grow, just by, experimenting and then if I discover something works, I would just go on with it and see why it works and try to discover what's good and what not. And that makes me make the next step.
The works. I mean, and it's interesting that you kind of say that about, it's my world, but what I do find so intriguing, as much as you're inside and in your studio, it's a real cocoon. It's on the top floor in Amsterdam, gorgeous light. I mean, it's like it's another world. And you experience that because you have all these other worlds sitting on your windows, sitting throughout the walls, in your fridge. It's everywhere. It's you, but then there's um, this moment of familiarity that I find so intriguing about what you're able to do. You're able to really, you say that it's all your world, but in some way, it's interesting how you allow us in. You're very generous in your, opening of that world. I mean, yes, you're very, you have this is Popel, and there's a certain front that you want us to perceive. But when you get to the work, you're really quite giving and sharing. And I always I think that honesty, and then the honesty of the paper, we see that there's this little slight not mistakes, but differences, things that don't line up. And I think that's where we enter as a viewer. All of a sudden it's not about that perfect moment, but it is a perfect moment because you're allowed to show us your faults, your beings, your world, your safety, which is kind of it's these opposing forces. It's like, I want to be safe, I want to have this own world, yet I'm going to show you guys all my secret backyard, so to speak. It's I find that kind of always intriguing about, and that's, I think, the success of your work is that entrance to itself. And so let me ask you this. I mean, you and I talked about, initially kind of introducing the world you have within the photographs to the outside. You achieved that in your at the museum in Den Haag, where you literally painted on the walls and then reintroduced the images on top of these viewing boxes, so that, for lack of a better word. And how has that experience been? I mean, not just here, but for Den Haag, when you were at the museum and introducing these space in a larger setting, so where you could literally walk into it and walk on it, so to speak.
Well, it was amazing because I'm always sketching. So when I came to the museum, for weeks I took a lot of pictures of the museum. I started making collages and making sketches, and so I was thinking, like, on paper what I wanted to do and what kind of pictures I wanted to make of the space, because the idea was that I would react on the space itself. And then I showed it to the museum. They were like, is this what you're going to do in real? I was like, oh, wow, this would be amazing. And actually, it was something that I always wanted to do. But for the first time, I realized that the things I always make in a very small size, I could bring it to the third dimension. So I could use the three-dimensional space as my two-dimensional collage. So it was actually fantastic to be able to bring it to a next level and to And it actually felt like as if I walked through my own collage, and I also made a maquette. And it was like as if I shrunk and I was like very small and walking around in my own maquette. So it was very nice to make the border of the walls and the work dissolve. So you don't know where the work starts and where the
begins,
space begins. So for me it was really this tastes like more. So for me this is just a start.
I can't wait to, see more of everything, of course, and especially be getting more people to enter this world. So we're very excited to, have you come to the space and actually talk about your work directly, but also we're just be able to gladly like talk a little bit about how these things were done. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time on this, and I really appreciate you giving us all this insight. And we look forward to having you here in Dallas in a couple of days. So that's going to be so exciting.
Yeah, super exciting.